I watched my sister's face go white as a sheet, and I'd never felt so satisfied in my life. Just minutes earlier, I had helped an old man on the bus. Sweet guy. We talked the whole ride. When I got off, he asked if he could walk with me to my sister's real estate office, said he might be interested in some properties. I had no idea who he really was, but when my sister saw him standing in her lobby, she froze. The color drained from her face. Her hands started shaking, and this kind old stranger looked at my powerful, always-in-control sister and said, "Hello, I believe you told your sister I was dead." My name is Lena Moreau. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've worked as an operations assistant at Moreau Holdings, a mid-sized investment and property firm in Lyon, France. Operations assistant sounds respectable, important even. In reality, it means I do everything no one else wants to touch. I answer calls. I manage schedules. I organize contracts. I refill the printer paper. I make coffee, endless cups of coffee. And when something goes wrong, it somehow always becomes my responsibility to fix it. All of that for a salary that barely covers rent in a small one-room apartment on the edge of the city. My apartment is so quiet at night that I can hear the neighbors' footsteps through the walls. Some people find that peaceful. For me, it's a reminder of how small my world has become. The company belongs to my sister, Claire Moreau. She's 8 years older than me and lives a life that feels like it belongs to a different universe. Claire drives a luxury SUV, owns a modern apartment overlooking the Rhone, and wears tailored suits that look effortless and expensive at the same time. She speaks with confidence, walks like she knows exactly where she's going, and never hesitates about anything. People admire her, clients trust her, employees are slightly afraid of her. And me? I'm Claire's little sister. That's how everyone introduces me, not by my title, not by my work, just by my relationship to her. For most of my life, I believed that was fair. Claire was always the capable one, the organized one, the one who made plans and followed through. When we were children, teachers praised her leadership. Relatives predicted she would be successful. I was the quiet one, the emotional one, the one who needed reassurance. At least that's the version of myself I learned to accept. 12 years ago, everything changed. Our parents died in a car accident on a rainy highway outside Grenoble. A drunk driver crossed lanes and hit them head-on. I was 19 in my second year of university, still living at home, still believing I had time to figure out who I wanted to be. One phone call ended that. Claire was 27 then, old enough to understand paperwork, old enough to be composed when I wasn't. She took control immediately of the funeral, the lawyers, the insurance, everything. I barely remember those weeks. I remember sleeping too much, crying without warning, forgetting to eat. Claire moved through it all with calm efficiency, telling me what needed to be done, what not to worry about. I trusted her completely. A month after the funeral, she sat me down at the kitchen table and explained the situation. She said our parents had more debt than we realized. Loans, credit cards, expenses they'd hidden from us. After everything was settled, she said my share of the inheritance was $18,000. I remember nodding. I remember feeling disappointed but not suspicious. Money didn't seem important compared to losing our parents. And this was my sister, my only family left. She also told me something else. She said we were alone now. Our mother had been an only child. Her parents were long gone. Our father, Claire explained, had been estranged from his own father for decades, a man named Antoine Moreau. According to her, they'd had a falling out that was never resolved. He died years ago, she told me, before the accident. Heart problems. So that door closed too. No parents, no grandparents, no extended family. Just the two of us. That belief shaped my entire adult life. When the inheritance money ran out, I left university and started working. Retail, reception, short-term contracts, anything I could find. I moved apartments more times than I could count, always downsizing, always telling myself this was temporary. Meanwhile, Claire's life expanded. She started Moreau Holdings with an investor. She traveled, she networked, she climbed. I watched from a distance, proud of her, even a little in awe. 3 years ago, she offered me a job. She said the company was growing. She said she needed someone she could trust, someone loyal, family. The salary wasn't great, but it was stable. Stability felt like luxury to me. So I said yes. I didn't notice how often she reminded me that she was helping me, how she framed my job like a favor, how she discouraged questions about finances or legal matters. "Leave that to me," she'd say. "You don't need that stress." And I believed her. Until the morning my metro line was delayed, my bank account was nearly empty, and I decided to take the bus instead. Until I stood up to help an old man who was struggling to keep his balance. Until a simple act of kindness put me on a path that would expose 12 years of lies, and a truth I was never supposed to find. That was the morning everything I thought I knew about my family began to unravel. The bus was already half full when I stepped on, the air thick with the quiet impatience of a weekday morning in Lyon. People stared at their phones or out the windows, sealed off in their own worlds. I found a place near the middle and held onto the pole, still thinking about the email Claire had sent me the night before. Another reminder about deadlines, another subtle note about how lucky I was to have a stable job. That was when I noticed him. The old man stood near the front, gripping a cane in one hand and a worn leather briefcase in the other. The bus lurched forward and he lost his balance. His cane slipped from his fingers and clattered against the floor. No one moved. I didn't think about it. I just stepped forward, caught his arm, and picked up the cane before he could fall. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and steady. "My reflexes aren't what they used to be." I helped him into my spot and stood for the rest of the ride. It was only a few stops. He insisted on introducing himself. "My name is Antoine," he said. "I don't usually take the bus, but today felt like a good day to walk less and observe more." There was something about the way he spoke, measured, thoughtful, that put me at ease. We started talking the way strangers sometimes do, when neither of them is trying to impress the other. He asked what I did for work. I told him I worked in an investment and property firm. I complained lightly about long hours, about always being the one who fixed problems but never made decisions. He listened, really listened. When I mentioned the company's name, Moreau Holdings, his expression changed for a split second. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. It was so brief, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. "That's your family's name," he said casually. "Yes," I replied. "My sister owns it." He nodded, thoughtful, but didn't ask anything more. By the time we reached my stop, I felt like we'd been talking much longer than 15 minutes. As I stepped off, he hesitated, then asked if he could walk with me for a bit. "I'm curious about the area," he said, "and perhaps about property options. Nothing serious, just information." It seemed harmless. He seemed harmless. So I said yes. As we walked toward the glass front building where Moreau Holdings was located, I found myself telling him things I usually kept to myself. How I dropped out of university after my parents died. How my sister had taken care of everything. How sometimes I felt like my life had paused while everyone else's kept moving. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He just nodded, occasionally asking gentle questions that made me think. "What were your parents like?" he asked at one point. I smiled faintly. "Kind. Quiet. They loved us. They worked hard. I think they expected us to look out for each other." He looked down at the pavement as we walked. "That matters," he said softly. At the time, I didn't know why his words stayed with me. The building came into view. Modern, clean, confident, Claire's world. As we stepped inside, I felt that familiar shift in myself, the way I always straightened my posture and lowered my voice when I entered her space. I offered Antoine coffee and asked him to wait in the lobby. Claire was on a call in her office. I could hear her voice through the door, calm, persuasive, perfectly controlled. While he waited, I studied him more closely. His clothes were modest but expensive in a quiet way. His hands were steady, his eyes sharp. This wasn't a man drifting through life. Claire ended her call a few minutes later. The door opened. She stepped out with her usual confident stride, already smiling, already prepared to be impressive. And then she saw him. The change in her was instant. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. One hand shot out and grabbed the edge of the doorframe, as if she suddenly needed support to stay upright. I'd seen my sister handle crises before. I'd never seen her lose control of her body. Antoine stood up slowly. "Bonjour, Claire," he said calmly. She didn't answer. "I believe," he continued, his voice steady, "you told your sister that I was dead." The silence that followed felt unreal. I laughed nervously, convinced this had to be some kind of mistake. "I'm sorry." "What?" Antoine turned to me. His eyes were kind, but there was something heavy behind them now, something sad. "My full name is Antoine Moreau," he said. "I am your grandfather, Lena." The words didn't make sense. "That's impossible," I said immediately. "My grandfather died years ago. Claire told me—" He looked back at my sister. "Is that what you told her?" he asked quietly. I turned to Claire, waiting for her to correct him. She didn't. And in that moment, the story I had lived with for 12 years began to crack, silently, completely, right down the middle. I stared at Claire, waiting for her to laugh. Waiting for her to say this was a misunderstanding, a coincidence, some strange joke that had gone too far. Anything but what was happening in front of me. She didn't laugh. She didn't speak at all. For a moment, my sister looked like a statue, perfectly still, perfectly composed, except for the faint tremor in her hands. Antoine watched her closely, not with anger, but with a kind of exhausted patience, as if he'd already lived this moment many times in his head. "Claire," I whispered, "say something." She inhaled slowly, then exhaled, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lena," she said, her voice controlled but tight. "This man is confused. He's elderly. Let's talk about this later." "I'm not confused," Antoine replied calmly, "and I don't think this should wait." My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear them. "Claire," I said again, louder this time, "why would he say you told me he was dead?" She looked at me then, really looked at me. And for the first time since we were children, I felt something cold and unfamiliar in her gaze. "You wouldn't have understood," she said quietly. Those words hit me harder than any accusation. "Understood what?" I asked. "That my grandfather was alive?" Antoine took a step closer. 12 years ago, he said gently. "After the accident, Claire came to see me. She told me her parents were gone." His voice wavered slightly. "And she told me you were gone too." The room spun. "You told him I was dead?" I asked. Claire's jaw tightened. "You were in no condition to deal with any of that," she snapped. "You could barely get out of bed. Someone had to handle things." "So you erased me?" I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. "You decided I didn't exist?" Antoine closed his eyes briefly. "I mourned you, Lena. I mourned all of you. I thought my entire family had ended in one night." Tears burned behind my eyes. "Why would you believe her?" I asked him, even though I already knew the answer. "Because she was my granddaughter," he said simply. "Why wouldn't I?" I turned back to Claire. "And you told me he was dead." She crossed her arms, defensive now. "Our father wanted nothing to do with him. You know that." "You said he died years before the accident," I shot back. "You said there was no one else." "That was easier," she said. "Easier for who?" I demanded. "For all of us," she replied sharply. "Do you think dragging an old man with a broken family history into your grief would have helped you?" Antoine reached into his briefcase then and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it carefully on the reception desk, like something fragile but dangerous. "I didn't come here to argue," he said. "I came here because the truth finally found me." Claire's eyes flicked to the folder. For the first time, real fear broke through her composure. 3 months ago," Antoine continued, "I was browsing property listings. I was thinking about downsizing, moving closer to the city. I saw the name Moreau Holdings. It caught my attention. My stomach dropped. On the company website," he said, "there was a photo, an employee profile, Lena Moreau." I swallowed hard. "I stared at that photo for a long time," he said. "The granddaughter I had buried in my heart was alive, working for the woman who told me she was dead." Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I hired a private investigator that same week," Antoine went on. "What he found confirmed everything." He opened the folder and slid several pages toward me. Photographs, bank statements, dates. I saw Claire standing beside Antoine in one picture, smiling warmly, her arm linked through his. The date in the corner read 8 years ago. My hands began to shake. "You visited him," I whispered, "while telling me he was dead. And while telling me you were," Antoine added quietly. Claire's voice dropped. "I was protecting what mattered." "What mattered?" I asked. "Control," Antoine said before she could answer. The word hung in the air. "For years," he continued, "she kept our lives separate. She told me she worked in consulting. She never mentioned this company, never mentioned you. She made sure this meeting could never happen." I felt sick. "All this time," I said slowly, "you were living 2 lives." Claire finally lost her temper. "You don't understand what it takes to build something," she said bitterly. "To survive. To win." "Win what?" I asked. "At the cost of your own sister?" She didn't answer. Antoine closed the folder. "This is only the beginning," he said. "There is much more you don't know." I looked at him, my chest tight with dread. "Like what?" He met my eyes. "Like what happened to your parents' estate." The words sent a chill through me. I had trusted the story I was given for 12 years. And now, standing in the lobby of my sister's company, I realized something terrifying. That story wasn't incomplete. It was a lie, carefully told, carefully maintained, and powerful enough to shape my entire life. I felt cold all over. The lobby suddenly felt too bright, too exposed, as if the glass walls were letting the whole city watch my life fall apart in real time. I sank into the chair behind the reception desk, my legs no longer steady enough to hold me. "The estate?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" Antoine didn't answer right away. He looked at Claire first, really looked at her, like a man finally seeing the truth behind a familiar face. "Tell her," he said quietly, "if you can." Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "There's nothing to tell," she said. "Everything was settled years ago." "That's not true," Antoine replied, "and you know it." He turned back to me. "After the accident," he said, "I tried to reach out. Letters, calls. Everything came back unanswered. I believed what Claire told me, that there was no one left." My chest tightened. "But years later," he continued, "she came to visit me. She said she was struggling, that she was carrying the weight of everything alone. I wanted to help." Claire's eyes flashed. "You offered?" "Yes," Antoine said evenly, "because I thought I was helping the only family I had." I stood up slowly. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," he said, 3 months ago, I found out you were alive, and when I asked questions, the answers didn't make sense." He opened the folder again and pulled out a single document. He handed it to me. It was a financial summary. Life insurance payout, property sale, investments. The numbers were far larger than anything I remembered. My breath caught. "This can't be right." Antoine nodded. "Your father had a life insurance policy worth $900,000. The house sold for $410,000. There were additional investments worth more than $300,000. The room blurred. "That's over 1.5 million euros, I whispered. "Yes," he said, "and legally, half of that belonged to you." I turned to Claire so slowly it felt like my body was moving through water. "You told me there were debts," I said. "You said there was almost nothing left." "There were debts," she snapped, "but I handled them." "How much?" I demanded. Antoine answered before she could. "Less than 100,000. The silence was deafening. I laughed once sharply without humor. "So you paid the debts and kept the rest." Claire didn't deny it. "You gave me 18,000 euros, I said, my voice breaking. "I dropped out of university because I thought there was no other option. I spent years barely surviving." "You would have wasted it," she said coldly. "You weren't ready." The words felt like a slap. "I was 19, I said. I was grieving." "And I was building something," she shot back. "Someone had to." Antoine's voice cut through the tension. "You forged documents." Claire froze. "You claimed Lena was mentally unfit," he continued. "You filed papers with the court giving yourself full control of the estate." I stared at her. "You did what?" Antoine slid another document toward me. "This is the petition you filed. This is the signature you claimed was hers." I looked down. It was my name. In handwriting, that wasn't mine. My stomach twisted violently. "I never signed this." I know, Antoine said. Neither did the investigator. Claire finally raised her voice. You don't know what it was like, she shouted. She was falling apart. I had to make decisions. You made theft look legal, Antoine replied. I felt tears spill over, hot and unstoppable. You stole my life, I whispered. Every year I struggled. You knew. Claire looked away. That money, Antoine said, funded this company. The office, the branding, the investors, everything. I looked around the lobby, the sleek furniture, the polished floors, the name on the wall. Moreau Holdings. Built on my parents' money. Built on my silence. Built on a lie. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of the desk to stay upright. What happens now? I asked quietly. Antoine closed the folder. Now, he said, you stop protecting her. Claire laughed bitterly. You think you can take this from me? Antoine met her gaze, calm and unwavering. I think the truth already has. And for the first time since we were children, I didn't see my sister as powerful. I saw her as afraid. I didn't go back to my desk after that. I don't remember how I left the office, only that at some point I was outside, standing on the pavement with the noise of Lyon rushing past me as if nothing had happened. Cars moved, people laughed, life continued, completely unaware that mine had just been rewritten. My phone buzzed nonstop in my bag, messages from colleagues, from Claire. I didn't answer any of them. I went straight home. My apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in as if they were listening. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing. The numbers kept repeating in my head. 1.5 million euros, 18,000 given to me, 12 years stolen. At some point, without fully deciding to, I stood up and went to the storage closet. There was a box on the top shelf. I'd carried it with me through every move since my parents died. Claire had given it to me after the funeral, telling me it was just sentimental things. Photos, cards, memories I might want someday. I had never really looked inside. It was easier not to. I pulled the box down and sat on the floor, my back against the wall. The cardboard was worn, the tape yellowed with age. My hands hesitated before opening it like I already knew what waited inside. Photographs were on top, my parents smiling on holidays, old birthday cards, my father's watch wrapped carefully in a cloth. Ordinary things, safe things. Then I reached the bottom. There was an envelope there, thicker than the others, cream-colored, my mother's handwriting neat and unmistakable. À nos chères filles, Claire et Lina. To our dear daughters. My breath caught. I remembered this envelope. Claire had shown it to me once, years ago, while I was barely holding myself together. She'd read parts of it out loud, telling me it proved our parents wanted everything handled fairly. I had nodded, too exhausted to ask questions. I had never read it myself. I opened it slowly. The letter was written by my father, dated just days before the trip that ended in the accident. His words were careful, loving, deliberate. He wrote about how proud he was of both of us, about how different we were, but how equally loved, about how he hoped we would always look out for each other, no matter what happened. Then he listed the details. Life insurance, $900,000. House value, approximately $410,000. Investments, $300,000 pluses. My vision blurred. At the bottom, in my mother's handwriting, was a single sentence. Tout doit être partagé équitablement entre nos filles. Everything is to be shared equally between our daughters. Equally. I let the letter fall into my lap. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, the weight of it settling into my bones. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was proof. I had trusted my sister with my entire future, and she had taken it without hesitation. Tears finally came then, slow at first, then uncontrollable. Not just for the money, but for the years I'd spent thinking I was less capable, less deserving, less fortunate. I wiped my face and picked up my phone. I called Antoine. I found the letter, I said as soon as he answered. Everything you said, it's all here. He was quiet for a moment. I was hoping you would, he said softly. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. What do I do now? I asked. You stop being alone, he replied. I have a lawyer. She specializes in estate fraud. She's very good. The next day, I sat in a small office across from Etienne Bernard, a man in his early 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for excuses. He reviewed the documents carefully: the letter, the court filings Antoine had obtained, the forged signatures. When he finished, he looked up at me. "Your sister didn't make a mistake," he said. "She committed fraud, serious fraud." My stomach twisted. "So this is criminal?" "Yes," he replied calmly. "Forgery, abuse of authority, theft. And what she did to your grandfather may qualify as elder financial exploitation." I exhaled shakily. "What happens now?" Etienne folded his hands. "Now we decide how far you're willing to go." I thought about Claire's face in the lobby, about the way she'd said, "I would have wasted it," about the life she built while I struggled to survive. "I want the truth," I said, "all of it." Etienne nodded once. "Then we prepare carefully." As I left his office that afternoon, something inside me shifted. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't reacting to a story someone else had written for me. I was ready to confront it. Etienne Bernard was very clear about one thing. "For now," he said, sliding the folder back toward me, "you say nothing. You act as if your life is exactly the same as it was yesterday." I frowned. "You want me to go back to work?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "You go back to your sister's company, you smile, you do your job, and you do not let her know that you have proof." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because the moment she suspects you," Etienne said calmly, "she will start erasing evidence, moving money, destroying records. People who lie at this level don't panic. They prepare." Antoine nodded beside me. "He's right. Claire has been planning her life for years." I didn't like it. The idea of sitting across from my sister, pretending nothing had changed, made my skin crawl. But I understood what was at stake. So the next morning, I went back to Moreau Holdings. I took the same bus, walked into the same glass building, past the same logo on the wall that now felt like an accusation. Claire was already there. She didn't mention the day before, not the confrontation, not Antoine, not the numbers that had shattered my world. She spoke to me like she always did, brief, efficient, distant. "Cancel my 11 o'clock call," she said, slipping her coat onto the back of her chair, "and print the Montreux files." "Of course," I replied. My voice didn't shake. That scared me. For the rest of the day, I played my role perfectly. I answered emails. I made coffee. I nodded while Claire talked about expansion plans and new investors. She was confident again, almost relaxed, as if she believed the storm had passed. She had no idea it was just beginning. At night, everything changed. After work, I met with Antoine and Etienne. We spread documents across tables and floors, piecing together a timeline of lies that stretched back more than a decade. Etienne requested official records from the court in Grenoble. When they arrived, the truth was worse than I expected. 12 years earlier, when I was barely functioning from grief, Claire had filed a petition claiming I was mentally incapable of managing my affairs. She submitted medical statements I had never seen. She attached documents granting her full control over the estate. And my signature was on all of them. Forged. "I never signed these," I said, my hands trembling as I stared at the pages. Etienne nodded. "We know." He traced the money next. The life insurance payout went into an account Claire controlled. The proceeds from the house sale followed. The investments were liquidated in stages, carefully spaced, quietly transferred. After paying off our parents' actual debts, less than 90,000 euros, Claire kept everything else, more than 1.4 million euros. "That money," Etienne said, "is the foundation of Moreau Holdings." I thought of the office, the branding, the early marketing campaigns Claire had once bragged about, all of it funded by money that should have been half mine. Then there was Antoine's side. For 8 years, Claire had visited him regularly. She brought gifts. She told stories. She played the role of devoted granddaughter. Over time, she convinced him to give her money. Gifts, she called them. More than 200,000 euros. She had also persuaded him to change his will twice. And recently, Etienne added, she tried to push for power of attorney. Antoine's hands clenched. I trusted her. Etienne's expression hardened. What she did qualifies as elder financial abuse. The room fell silent. So what happens now? I asked. Etienne leaned back. We have two paths: civil court, where we fight for restitution over years, or criminal charges. And if we go criminal? I asked. Forgery, fraud, abuse of authority, financial exploitation, he said evenly. If the case is solid, she loses everything. I didn't hesitate. I don't want a settlement. Antoine looked at me, then nodded. Neither do I. Etienne folded his hands. Then we need time. 3 weeks. That's how long I need to build this properly. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of pretending. For the next 21 days, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was the obedient assistant, the grateful younger sister. I followed instructions and kept my head down. By night, I watched the truth take shape. Bank transfers mapped, forged signatures analyzed, witness statements prepared. Claire never suspected a thing. She still spoke to me like I was dependent on her, and maybe she thought I always would be. On the 21st night, Etienne called me. We're ready, he said. Tomorrow we move forward. I lay awake in my apartment staring at the ceiling, my heart steady in a way it had never been before. Tomorrow the lie would stop controlling my life. Tomorrow everything would change. The morning Etienne filed the complaint, I arrived at the office early. Earlier than usual. I turned on the lights, started the coffee machine, and set Claire's mug on her desk exactly the way she liked it. Black, no sugar, handle facing right. My hands were steady. My reflection in the glass looked calm, almost detached. At 8:57 a.m., my phone buzzed. Filed. That was it. No dramatic announcement. No warning bells. Just a single word that meant the story controlling my life for 12 years was now officially out of her hands. Claire arrived a few minutes later, heels clicking sharply across the floor. She didn't look at me. Reschedule my lunch, she said, and move the Zurich call to tomorrow. Of course, I replied. She nodded and disappeared into her office. The morning passed like any other. Emails, calls, meetings. Clients walked through the lobby with confident smiles, trusting the name on the wall, Moreau Holdings, never suspecting what was about to collapse behind it. At 2:43 p.m., the glass doors opened. 2 men stepped inside. They didn't look like clients. No briefcases, no hesitation. One of them scanned the room, then fixed his gaze on me. Is Claire Moreau here? My heart thudded once, but my voice didn't betray me. She's in her office, I said, pointing down the hall. They nodded and walked past me. Claire came out moments later, her professional smile already in place. Bonjour, she said smoothly. How can I help you? Claire Moreau, one of the men said, holding up his badge. You are under arrest. The smile vanished. The office went silent. For a fraction of a second, Claire didn't move. Then her eyes snapped to me. What is this? She demanded. Lena, what is going on? The officer continued calmly. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be. You did this, Claire hissed, cutting him off. You. I said nothing. As the handcuffs came out, her composure cracked completely. This is a mistake, she snapped. I'm a business owner. You can't do this. Forgery, the officer said evenly. Fraud, abuse of authority, elder financial exploitation. Each word landed like a blow. The cuffs closed around her wrists. I watched the same hands that had signed forged documents with my name, hands that had controlled my life for years, now bound in steel. Claire twisted toward me, her eyes wild. After everything I did for you, she spat. I gave you a job. I took care of you. You would be nothing without me. For the first time, her words had no power. They led her past the reception desk, past the company logo, past the life she'd built on lies. The glass doors closed softly behind her. No one spoke. I sat down at my desk and let out a slow breath. Peace settled in. Not joy, not triumph, just a deep, unfamiliar quiet. By the next morning, Lyon's business circles were buzzing. Claire Moreau, respected executive, rising star, arrested for fraud. The phones rang nonstop. Not with new opportunities, but with fear. Clients demanded explanations. Investors asked if their money was safe. Contracts were frozen pending review. Claire's silent partner, Julien Roche, called me personally. He had invested heavily in the company's early days, trusted Claire completely, never questioned the books. Now he was terrified. He hired a forensic accountant that same afternoon. What the accountant uncovered changed everything. Claire hadn't just stolen from me and Antoine. She'd been stealing from the company. Fake expense reports, payments to shell entities, missing escrow funds quietly redirected, small amounts spread carefully over time, designed to avoid attention. Julian had two choices: protect Claire and risk criminal charges himself, or cooperate fully. He chose survival. Within days, federal-level investigators were involved. The case expanded beyond family fraud into financial crimes that spanned years. I watched it all unfold from a distance. I quit my job quietly, packed my desk, took my coat, and walked out without looking back. The building no longer belonged to her, or to the lie that had shaped my life. That night, Antoine called me. "It's over," he said softly. I looked around my apartment, the same small space, the same quiet walls, but something inside me had changed forever. "It's not over," I replied. "It's just finally begun." Once the investigation widened, everything accelerated. What had begun as a private reckoning between siblings became something far larger. Too large for Claire to control, too public to contain. The authorities didn't just look at the documents ATN submitted. They went through everything. Years of transactions, client files, escrow accounts, tax records, and the truth kept growing. Julian Roche cooperated fully. He handed over every email, every contract, every account he'd ever signed without reading closely. His lawyer stayed beside him the entire time, guiding every word, every disclosure. Julian wasn't innocent, but he wasn't the architect either. Claire was. The forensic accountants worked methodically, following money the way a map follows roads. What they found was devastating. At least 10 additional victims. Elderly clients who had trusted Claire to handle property sales while quietly skimming funds from escrow, young couples who lost deposits on apartments that were never finalized, investors who received reports that didn't match the numbers behind them. No one had lost enough at first to sound alarms. That was the point. Claire had built her fraud carefully, small amounts spread across years, buried under confidence and charm. She counted on people blaming themselves before blaming her. Hearing their stories felt like looking into mirrors. Different lives, same pattern. I attended some of the preliminary hearings quietly, sitting in the back row. Claire was always immaculately dressed, even in custody. Hair pulled back, posture perfect, expression calm. She still believed she could talk her way out of this, but evidence doesn't listen. Her assets were frozen within weeks. The apartment overlooking the Rhone, seized. The luxury car, impounded. Bank accounts, locked down pending trial. I walked past her building one afternoon purely by accident. A legal notice was taped to the entrance. Strangers lived inside now, unaware of the life that had once unfolded there. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. Antoine and I grew closer during that time. Not in dramatic moments, but in quiet ones. Coffee together, long walks, stories filling in gaps we could never recover but no longer tried to replace. "I should have looked harder," he said once. "You trusted family," I replied. "So did I." The trial date was set. For weeks, the courtroom became my second home. One by one, witnesses testified. A retired woman who had lost the savings she needed for assisted living. A couple who delayed starting a family because their deposit vanished. Julian, pale and ashamed, explaining how he never questioned success. Then Antoine. He spoke calmly, his voice steady as he described 8 years of manipulation, how Claire positioned herself as his only remaining family, how she accepted gifts, rewrote wills, and nearly took full control of his finances. And then it was my turn. I told the court about being 19 and broken, about trusting my sister to protect me, about building my entire adult life around a lie I had never chosen. Claire didn't look at me. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. Guilty. Multiple counts. Fraud, forgery, financial abuse, tax violations. The judge didn't soften his words. "You exploited grief, family, and trust," he said. "You built success on deception. This court finds no mitigating circumstance for that." The sentence followed. 26 years in prison. The room was silent. Claire was 39 years old. She would be in her 60s before she saw freedom again. Restitution was ordered. Every seized asset was liquidated. Funds were traced, divided, returned where possible. Some victims recovered everything, others only part, but justice, at least, was visible. When the transfer finally appeared in my account, I stared at the screen for a long time. Just under 1 million euros, my inheritance plus interest. It wasn't the number that made me emotional. It was what it represented: time, choice, possibility. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, not crying, not celebrating, just breathing, deeply and freely for the first time in years. The truth had cost me 12 years, but it had finally given me my life back. The money didn't feel real at first. I kept opening my banking app, half expecting the numbers to disappear, like they'd been a mistake someone would correct at any moment. Nearly 1 million euros sat there quietly, not demanding attention, not solving everything instantly, just existing. What surprised me most was that my first reaction wasn't excitement. It was relief. Relief that I could finally breathe without calculating every decision. Relief that the future was no longer a narrow corridor with walls closing in. Relief that the story I'd lived under for 12 years no longer defined me. The first thing I did was simple. I paid my debts, every lingering bill, every balance I'd carried out of necessity, not choice. Watching those numbers drop to zero felt more powerful than any luxury purchase ever could. For the first time since I was 19, I owed nothing to anyone. Then I slowed down. I didn't quit my apartment right away. I didn't buy anything extravagant. I gave myself time, something I'd never had the privilege to do before. I met with a financial advisor recommended by Antoine, someone who spoke to me plainly without pressure or assumptions. "You don't need to decide who you'll be forever," she told me. "You just need to decide who you'll be next." That felt manageable. I enrolled in evening courses at a local university: business ethics, property law, financial management. Sitting in a classroom again felt strange at first, like stepping back into a life I'd abandoned. But this time, I wasn't there because I was desperate. I was there because I chose to be. Antoine came to my first class with me, insisting on walking me to the building like I was a child on her first day of school. "You don't have to," I laughed. "I know," he said. "I want to." That was the difference. We built our relationship carefully. No pressure to make up for lost time, no forced closeness, just honesty. Long conversations over coffee, stories about my father I'd never heard, how stubborn he was, how deeply he loved us, how he struggled with his own mistakes. "You have his sense of fairness," Antoine told me once, "even when it costs you." I carried that with me. 6 months after the sentencing, I made another decision. I started my own company. Not an empire, not a statement, just a small, transparent property management firm focused on clarity and trust. I named it Moreau Claire, a quiet reclaiming of my name, stripped of manipulation, grounded in meaning. It was just me at first. I answered calls myself, reviewed contracts line by line, explained every detail to clients, even when it took longer, especially when it took longer. People noticed. Slowly the company grew, one employee, then another, a handful of properties. Nothing flashy, nothing hidden. Every success felt earned. Claire wrote to me once. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, my name written carefully, almost timidly. She said she was sorry, that she'd had time to think. That prison was lonely. That family was all she had left. She asked for money. I read the letter once. Then I folded it and placed it in the back of a drawer. Some boundaries don't need explanations. A year passed. I moved into a new apartment, still modest but filled with light. I bought a reliable car, not luxurious, just dependable. Every small decision reinforced the same truth. Stability was something I could now choose. One afternoon, my assistant buzzed my office. "There's a call from a correctional facility," she said carefully. "Do you want to accept it?" I didn't hesitate. No. I hung up and returned to my work. Later that evening, Antoine and I sat by the river, watching the city lights reflect off the water. "You did well," he said quietly. "I didn't do it alone," I replied. He smiled. "That's the point. I used to believe kindness made you vulnerable. Now I know better. Lies are what weaken you. They hollow you out slowly, convincing you that you deserve less than you do. The truth doesn't fix everything, but it gives you something far more valuable, a choice. And for the first time in my adult life, I was choosing my future, fully awake, fully informed, and finally free. A year after the trial ended, my life no longer felt like something I was surviving. It felt like something I was building. My office was small, smaller than Claire's ever was, but it was mine in a way hers never had been. No glass walls meant to impress, no expensive furniture meant to intimidate, just light, quiet, and the steady rhythm of honest work. Every morning, I unlocked the door myself. That mattered to me. People sometimes asked if I missed my sister. The question always landed strangely. I didn't miss the woman she became, and I wasn't sure the woman I thought I knew had ever really existed. What I missed, if anything, was the idea of having a sister who would have stood beside me instead of above me. But missing an idea isn't the same as wanting it back. 6 months after the sentencing, another letter arrived from the prison. This one was shorter, less dramatic. No requests for money, just an apology, written carefully, as if the right words could undo years of damage. She said she understood now. She said she had lost everything. She said she hoped I would forgive her someday. I held the letter for a long time. Then I placed it back in the envelope and put it away. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a performance. It doesn't require reopening doors that were closed for a reason. Some endings are not cruel. They are necessary. Antoine never pushed me. He never told me what I should feel or who I should be. He simply showed up. Sunday lunches, long walks, quiet conversations that filled in the gaps without trying to erase them. One evening, as we sat watching the city settle into night, he said something that stayed with me. Truth doesn't always arrive when we're ready, he said, but it arrives when we're able to carry it. I thought about that often, about how close I had come to never knowing. If my metro hadn't been delayed, if I hadn't taken the bus, if I hadn't stood up to help a stranger who needed a seat, my entire life could have remained unchanged. That realization humbled me, because it reminded me that kindness is rarely dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand reward. But sometimes it opens doors that lies can't keep closed forever. My company stabilized, then slowly grew. I hired carefully. I chose transparency even when it cost me time or profit. I slept well at night knowing no one would wake up one day and realize I had taken something from them. That peace was worth everything. One afternoon, my assistant buzzed my office again. "There's another call from a correctional facility," she said gently. I paused for a moment. Then I said, "No, thank you." I hung up and returned to my work. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. I used to think being strong meant enduring whatever was handed to you, staying quiet, being grateful for scraps because questioning them felt dangerous. I don't believe that anymore. Strength is asking questions. Strength is reading the documents yourself. Strength is trusting your instincts when something doesn't add up. And most of all, strength is choosing what you build after the truth comes out. I don't tell this story to seek sympathy. I tell it because someone listening might recognize themselves in it. Someone who trusts too easily. Someone who believes the version of reality they were given because it came from family. Someone who feels small in a life that never quite expands. Here's what I learned. Lies can last a long time. They can shape years, even decades, but they are never permanent. Truth has a way of surviving, quietly, patiently, until the moment it's strong enough to stand. Sometimes it arrives in courtrooms and verdicts, and sometimes it arrives disguised as an old man on a city bus who just needs help finding a seat. That day changed my life, not because I helped him, but because the truth finally found me.